Hi YouTube, I've just finished this sci-fi scene and this video is going to be about all of the different stages that I went through to get to this finished painting. Okay, so this was my initial drawing done on a piece of full-size mount board, and it's just establishing the main features of the landscape. Next I started painting in the details of the distant landscape. I'm using gouache to paint this. I don't often use gouache, I normally would use acrylic for a big painting like this. If you haven't used gouache before, it's basically like a sort of more opaque watercolour. You tend to use it a bit thicker than with sort of traditional watercolour. I really like it for this kind of work though. It's good for getting all these kind of mountain details and that sort of thing where you need quite a lot of blending. Next I continue blocking in all the dark parts of the kind of foreground rocks. With traditional watercolours you normally would be working light to dark. With gouache it doesn't really matter, you can choose to work dark to light if you want, or light to dark, it doesn't really matter either way. Next I blocked in the sky, and I was trying to keep it as flat as possible. This would be a lot easier actually with acrylics to get a nice flat colour, but you can see I ran out of paint about 3/4 of the way across, so on the right hand side it's looking a bit patchy, but that doesn't matter because I know I'm going to be putting a lot of kind of details over the top of the sky anyway. Next I filled in all of the ground areas, leaving quite a lot of white bits to give it some texture, and I'll come back and work these up later. I also filled in the brown for the kind of twisted wood features. Again, this is just a first colour. What we're doing at this stage really is doing something called killing the white, just getting rid of all the white areas and trying to fill the whole picture to start with before we do any more detail to it. Next I added these dark blue areas and also the brown areas onto the balls in the foreground and the sort of dome things on the top of the towers. These again will need quite a lot of detail added to them later, but this just blocks in the main shapes. Then I added a mid-tone colour for the two rock outcrops in the foreground, and I think this starts to give them some shape. Again, a lot of blending will need to be done on these later, but they're starting to give the rough idea. Next I added the sort of arch at the top of the painting with the stalactites hanging down. This was mainly to get some more dark into the painting and balance out the dark that's in the rocks. Next I tried to get some texture in the foreground just to break it up a little bit, so this is all done with clumps of grasses. Then I've come in with some more darks to start giving it some definition and detail. So I've blended quite a lot of this as well. So this is all the sort of cracks in the foreground rocks, some of the dark shadows on the curly bits of wood, and also some of the dark grey bits like on the posts and underneath the domes. Okay, so this is the first blending on the spheres in the foreground. You can see what I've basically done is just go from the dark blue at the top, you've got the pale blue at the bottom, and then I've just put like an in-between blue in the middle and blended into the dark and into the light. I was going to finish off these balls completely and then show you the finished product straight away, but I thought it's much better to show you all the different stages that they went through to become finished. Okay, so next on the spheres I added the bits of land at the bottom, and you can see they're basically just a sort of a reflection of the kind of surrounding cliffs and that kind of thing. And what's important about this is you have to kind of curve them as well, like imagine them kind of warped around a curve. So it's almost like painting 3 mini landscapes. I also started the highlights, which is just a case of doing a bright white circle in the middle of each and then trying to blend out from those. This doesn't have to be perfect yet at this stage, it's just really to get an overall sort of glow effect. I have also added a very dark blue curve on the left hand side of each ball. This gives each one a whole lot more contrast. Okay, to give the illusion of detail I've added quite a lot of this foliage hanging down from the top of the painting. That was actually really quick to do because I haven't added any shadows or highlights on it. They're just like a sort of greyish green silhouette really. And then what I've also done is more shadows on all the kind of bits of grass and all the textured bits in the foreground. This makes a big difference, and that was all done with this sort of maroony colour, which is not a colour that I'd normally use for shadows. I tend to use either sort of a bluey grey colour like Payne's grey or sepia or something like that for my shadows, but this has worked quite well. Okay, look at the difference that the finishing touches has made to the spheres in the foreground. Literally all I've done is this kind of starburst effect highlight, and that is just a case of doing lines coming from the centre point, but they have to kind of curve slightly to give the illusion that they're on a curved surface. Also I've added some white highlights, just a couple at the top of each ball, and then also like a white highlight curve just along the edge on the right hand side of each ball. It's very thin, but it makes such a difference to the overall kind of shine effect. I also added a small highlight on the top of each dome, and I'll be doing the sort of starburst effect on those as well later. And also above the spheres in the foreground, I've just added this kind of structure, these sort of bars, to make it look a bit more sort of technical. Okay, at this point I felt like the scene was looking really interesting. I really liked how it was, all the different features were coming together, but I just felt that it lacked a sort of main focal point in the foreground, and I really like kind of, you know, Star Wars and all that kind of thing, and I love designing my own little creatures, and I just thought it would look so much better if it had something like this in the foreground. So I sketched this out in my watercolour pad, and I was happy with how this was looking, and I just need to then trace it through and print it onto the actual painting. Okay, so you can see what it looked like after I'd traced it out. This technique, by the way, is really good for if ever you're trying to plan a big landscape or something. To trace something out and have it on a sheet of tracing paper just means you can position it anywhere you want then on the landscape, so you can try it out, you can see what it looks like, and you can get it in exactly the right position before you decide to print it through. So I decided to actually flip him over and have him as if he's walking into the scene rather than walking out of it, and I think this worked better. And then I actually scribbled through on the top and printed it through. Now when I removed the tracing paper, it didn't show up particularly well. I could only just about see where my lines were, but it was enough to do the next stage. Okay, so this is a technique that I use quite often when I'm doing acrylic paintings as well. So if you've got an outline of something and you need to fill it in, obviously if you're just using a base colour to get the overall shapes in there, what you don't want to do is go right up and fill the whole shape in. It would just become a silhouette of the whole kind of object. What you need to do to be able to see all the details still is just leave like little tiny thin gaps. Wherever you've got a line, you just leave a little thin gap, and that means that you can come in later and you can add, you know, shadows and highlights and things afterwards, but you still need to be able to see all this detail before you can do that. So I just used a mid-grey colour here just to get my overall shape, and it's not done particularly well because I know I'm going to do a lot of overworking onto this later. So at this stage, this is what he's looking like within the scene. Next I use pure black paint just to go in and fill in all those little thin gaps that I was talking about before, and this just shows where all of the main dark areas of shadow are going to be, and I can blend out them from these. And this is how he's looking within the scene at this stage. Next I use pure white just to give all the areas where the main highlights are going to be. And you can see by adding those white areas it makes him stand out a bit more than he did within the scene. Next I wanted to colour him up a little bit, so I started with grey, didn't I, and then I added black shadows and then white highlights. Now I've gone in and you can see I've added blue areas to the creature that is being ridden, and then the creature who's the rider, I've made him green. And then anything that is kind of leather or a cape or anything like that, I've added little brown hints to. And this is how he's looking within the scene. He is starting to look a bit better now. He's got a few colours on him, but he still needs to be blended in a little bit more. You can see that I've added some maroon shadows underneath the feet of the creature as well. This just sets him onto the ground surface. Okay, the changes that I've made to the creature here are a bit subtler. You might not notice them at first, but what I've essentially done is taken some of that maroon kind of colour from all the background, all the shadows, and I've just added that onto the creature as well. That ties him in much more with the background. You can see I've also done this black structure in the foreground. I just needed to add something to give it extra contrast at the front, and I think this has worked really well. And it's just a sort of like a technical kind of looking silhouette, little structure, adds a bit of detail and a bit of dark, which is what I mainly wanted to add in the foreground. I was going to put sort of some kind of silhouette plant or something here, but I think this structure has worked much better. So this is how it ended up looking. I'm really pleased with this overall, and when I look at it, you know, there's always more things that I feel I could do to it, but sometimes you just got to think, you know, do I want to carry on this painting forever and ever? Because you could add, you know, shadows on every leaf and highlights on every leaf, but I think actually there's enough detail there to do what I want it to do. So I'm happy to stop at this point and call it finished. Okay, I like to leave you with these kind of satisfying run-throughs of all the different stages, kind of sped up. I probably spent about 3 weeks on this painting, on and off, quite a few sort of late nights. So there's quite a lot of hours have gone into this. So it's really nice to be able to see it like this, all kind of sped up. Thanks for watching this video. Check out my other painting tutorials on YouTube, and I'll catch you in the next video.